Right, we are live, so over to you.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Bristol Borough Council's Community Scrutiny Group meeting yet again. I'd like to remind everyone that we are live on YouTube for 1,000 viewers and Laura's mum. So say hello to Laura watching us online. So just remember with the YouTube that everything we said is going to be recorded and will be available online afterwards to look back on. So in addition, under local authorities regulations 2012, people may film, record, tweet or blog from this meeting. Use of any such images or sound recordings is not under the council's control. And as usual, if you could switch off your microphones when you're not speaking, just to help the recording, that'd be much appreciated. So in terms of tonight's agenda, obviously we've got the main one big item of the carbon management plan. So the officers with us this evening, Darryl Birch, as always, lead officer, service manager, neighbourhoods. We've got Derek Hayden here, Derek leads special communities, and Laura Howlett. Welcome to the Community Scrutiny Group. Who's here as the environmental team manager. So very much welcome and look forward to hearing from you this evening. So 5 items on the agenda. First of all is apologies for absence.
Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Healy, and Councillor Butler is substituting for him this evening, and also Councillor Purdue-Horan, and we have Councillor John Stockwood substituting.
Great, thank you very much. And declaration of interest. Any declarations of interest when the officer or councillor present? No, thank you. Minutes of the meeting on 27th of January 2022. Has anyone got any comments they'd like to raise about the minutes? No. Well, we got an answer for the question you asked me earlier, so now we can speak to you about it at the end, if that's okay. The one you raised earlier, thank you. Okay, so if everyone's happy with the minutes, would like to formally move that they're adopted. Everyone in favour? No one against? Great, thank you very much. So that was quick 3 items. I don't think the next item is quick, but they never know. So there's carbon management plan progress update. So as we said at the last meeting, originally we were going to have 2 items on there, which was the waste strategy update and the carbon management plan. As suspected, the waste strategy we can't talk about yet because it's not come through government. So the very quick update from Darryl is there is no update probably really. There you go. So that's why we've got the one item agenda. Rather than move something forwards, we felt that tonight's presentation going through the information was going to be very much long, and we didn't want to rush one item and try to squeeze everyone in and not give them the proper scrutiny. So this evening it might look like only a small agenda, but it's not going to be from all the information I've seen. So without further ado, I will hand over to Derek. Laura, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this evening we're here to review the carbon management plan. You'll all have received a copy of the report. The recommendations this evening are to consider and endorse the progress to date of the adopted carbon management action plan, and recommendation B is to make comments and contribute towards the emerging carbon management actions priorities for 22-23. My colleague Laura Howlett will present a comprehensive presentation on the activity over the last year and then set out our priorities for the forthcoming year. Following Chairman's briefings, we provided an updated carbon management action plan, which highlighted for members and really to try and bring to life the dashboard, which is in appendices 1. So we're quite happy to take questions on the dashboard, the carbon management action plan, or the substantive body of the report if it's not covered in the presentation. So I'll pass over to Laura to start the presentation.
Thank you for that, Derek. Right, so I'm going to take you through a presentation on our progress against the carbon management plan. I'm also going to end with a few slides on what the next steps are for this year. Before we get started though, I just want to say, for those of you who haven't met before, it is lovely to meet you and lovely to see you here. And for the familiar faces, lovely to see you again. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here this evening. I have to say, when Derek told me I would be coming under scrutiny, I just assumed he knew that my mother-in-law was in town. So this is entirely new for me. So if I go wrong anywhere, please be a bit forgiving, but I will answer any questions you have at the end of the presentation. So to give you an outline of what I'm going to discuss with you today, what I'm going to go through, this is the content of these slides. So I'm going to quickly talk through the overview of the progress we've made against our carbon management plan and the most recent updates. I will then go through in detail some of the particular projects that perhaps stand out or that we just want to share with you, particularly where the good progress has been made. They fall into 3 areas. So we'll be going through the council, conservation, and what changes we've made within the community. And then, as I've said, at the end, I'll just go through a few slides of what the coming year is going to look like for us here at the council. I just want to say before I get started that the work that's happened here, this isn't the result of one person or one team pushing particular pieces of work. This is the result of everybody in the council, whether it's waste, fleet, properties, HR, policy. They've all had a hand in developing and making this management plan work and in progressing all of these actions. So it really is a whole council-led activity, and it really is something the whole of the Rushcliffe Borough Council is on board with. So firstly, as you know, in March 2020, the Rushcliffe Borough Council, they made a commitment to work towards becoming carbon neutral for our own operations by 2030. And the council is also committed to supporting our local residents and businesses with this commitment. The new climate change strategy was released, which I hope you've all had a chance to see. That was released in December 2021. It strengthened that commitment. It's added more detail to that original commitment that we released. And in addition, we're setting a new commitment. So beyond 2030, it's working towards that goal of being net zero by 2050, in line with that government outcome from COP26. Over on the right here is a little excerpt from that strategy. And it's how we're linking in council, so reducing our own emissions, we've already discussed, the community, so supporting those residents and how they reduce their own carbon footprint, and also how they reduce their energy bills, which we know is a very hot topic right now. And then conservation, so protecting our wildlife, protecting our biodiversity in the land that we own as a borough. And it's those 3 key aspects that make for a sustainable Rushcliffe. So we talk about net zero and we talk about being carbon neutral by 2030. Well, what's the difference? Well, that carbon neutral by 2030 target for our own emissions, that's in the red line, in the little red circle there. That's that target for 2030. And it's a good target and it's an ambitious target. But as you can see, for the borough, the public sector only has a very small percentage, less than 7% of the emissions of the entire borough come from the public sector, come from the services we provide, whether it's these office buildings or our waste vehicles going out. A large portion of the emissions that affect our environment come from other things: public transport, people commuting to their day jobs, from industry, from the businesses we have out there, and from domestic use from the houses, which is why it's so important to have that further target of how are we going to reduce the carbon footprint of the entire borough and how are we going to support everyone else to do that. So to give you a bit of an overview on our carbon management plan, so bear in mind this is the current plan which was set up for our own emissions to that 2030 target. These are some of the highlights from that plan that we've had really successful, really positive movement on so far. So we got £100,000 in Salix funding, which enabled us to deliver LED lighting upgrades across the RBC estate. You'll see we have LED lights already here at the arena, but it's across the rest of the estate as well. We're building a new office centre at Bingham. It's been built to a BREEAM very good standard, and that was achieved through a large influx of cash to build something so green and so modern. And we've got £367,000 worth of carbon reduction technology gone into that new building. And the new Bingham Leisure Centre, which is attached, it aims to be 80% more efficient than other leisure centres. Leisure centres use huge amounts of energy in heating the pools and in heating that large environment you've got in there. So that's a really big impact. We've changed pitch lighting to LED on some of our sports pitches so people can play later into the night, but with a more efficient, better, brighter, but greener light going on. We've changed our procurement policy. We've added into it a strong statement on sustainable procurement, telling all our staff when you're procuring something, you're not just looking for the best price anymore. You're looking for those green credentials. You're looking for local businesses that don't have to drive as far to deliver the products. You're looking for businesses with an ethical and environmental lean to them. So we've added that in there so that it's going down to that level. We've set aside £1 million as a climate action reserve fund, and that is there to finance and fund various projects that have already begun and some that will be coming up this year. So we've got that money, we've got that financing already set aside, ready to make those changes. We've developed a Carbon Clever brand, which is the council's own branding that we put on our communications out to people so that they can recognise, so that residents and businesses recognise when we send out to them, this is part of the Rushcliffe Borough Council, this is part of our initiative, this is something we are doing, it's getting that out there. I'll talk a bit more about this shortly, but we've recently done a trial to trial biofuel in our waste vehicles. I'll talk a bit more about that in depth. I've got a slide on it, so I won't discuss it too detailed here. And also electric vehicle charging points. We've started to roll them out across the borough, and we've got more coming. And again, I've got more detail and a slide on that further down for you. So I'll give you a little bit more detail on those. And these are just some photos from them. So there's our pitch. Gresham. Oh.
Yeah, it's a Gresham Sports Park. So it was a £1.2 million capital redevelopment for that site, and it's within the financial commons. So we had one pitch there. We've now gone to 2 pitches. But to give an example of that, the previous floodlighting, which is fine, we are able to have twice the amount of pitches for the same energy by changing the lighting infrastructure to LED. So there's not been a net increase, and we've been able to use the same electrical infrastructure to power them. So there's not had to be additional substation infrastructure to be able to deliver that. So just a prime example of some of the capital work that we've done recently, which is less obvious than the major redevelopments within Bingham, as an example of how we're trying to embed this into our capital redevelopment programme as the processes by which we are driving our carbon neutral targets.
Thank you. No, thank you. And then just some photos there from that Bingham Arena, and in the top left, that Carbon Clever branding that we were talking about that you've probably seen on our emails and our communications going out to you. So I say we've broken down our strategy into the 3 key areas, and this is some of the work we've been doing to lower our council emissions, our direct emissions that we own. So one of the things we've set to open this year, which is quite exciting, is the first one of the first electrical powered cremators in the UK. And it's going to be run on a green tariff, and it will reduce emissions compared to your traditional gas cremator by approximately 80%, and it will substantially reduce nitrogen oxide emissions as well. So it's a really sort of clean, it's something that we need, it's something that is unfortunately necessary in life, but this is a greener, cleaner way of doing it. The existing, and it's not just stopped at the building or the energy or the fabric, it's gone on to the existing surrounding area has been managed so as not to disturb some of the existing boundary hedges, which are important for wildlife, but to improve them, to put in additional planting, additional flowers, trees, shrubs, again, improving that biodiversity. Also be adding in bat and bird boxes to encourage more wildlife into the area. So it's a really good example of how you can reduce your emissions and improve the environment at the same time. For those of you who are interested, progress is being showcased at a Discovery Day, which will be held in the Copgrave Library on Wednesday, May the 4th. I talked a little about this a second ago. So our waste vehicles, a lot of people are talking about changing their waste, a lot of councils, sorry, are talking about changing their waste vehicles over to electric vehicles. That doesn't work for us. In Rushcliffe Borough, we have a lot of remote houses out in the countryside, houses we need to get to. It's not always easy to have that electric charging because of the distance they have to go. So in October 21, we started a trial using HVO, so vegetable oil essentially. It's a really good swap over because you don't need to do anything to the engines. You don't need to change anything. You just pour it in and it goes. You've probably heard in the news recently that due to fuel prices, people have started pouring vegetable oil into their diesel cars. Apparently they smell like chip shops. It's the same thing here. You can simply swap over, put it in. It has no effect on the vehicles. And it's been really successful. We haven't had any breakdowns, any issues, any problems with that. And the great thing about this is we actually worked in partnership with one of the other businesses, Artex, in the local community to make this happen. So it was a great joined up piece of working. It's a completely renewable fuel. and it reduces CO2 emissions by up to 90% compared to that traditional fossil diesel fuel. So far, we've used a total of 4,300 litres, and that's already reduced over 12,000 tonnes of CO2 that's not been released into the atmosphere just from that trial. So we are going to be looking forward about how we can roll that out across the fleet. What are the cost implications? How manageable is it? Where do we source the fuel and where do we store the fuel? We've got to get through those little hurdles first, but it's a really, really positive step in the right direction.
We're very conscious though in terms of there's lots of challenges in terms of heavy goods waste vehicles and the battery technology that will be required to power those vehicles over our geography. We understand in terms of using biofuels as a long-term objective. It's not the end goal to be carbon neutral, but it is a potential stepping stone that allows us to be on that journey. So it's Darryl and his team in terms of early adopting and piloting these activities to try and identify opportunities that we have to reduce our target, but appreciate we need technology and the infrastructure and things to come along with us to have that end goal, to be able to have an appropriate vehicle that's able to do the job that we need to do with the weight and with the capacity that is not powered, that is electric. Sorry.
Thank you, Derek. So I'm sure some of you will be aware, a really exciting time going on at our country park. So Rushcliffe Country Park is currently undergoing a huge redevelopment. So there's a redevelopment happening to the park anyway in regards to freshening up the visitors centre, making it more usable, installing a cafe, so we've got better facilities for our visitors. But the bit I want to share with you today is we are aiming to make this our first net zero country park. So what are we doing to reduce our emissions there? Well, we're installing solar PV. We've got a large south-facing roof that is at an angle. It's perfect for solar. So we've got an array of solar panels going across there. In conjunction with that, we're installing an air source heat pump. Now, previously at the park, we had a biofuel boiler that would burn wood pellets. It's gotten to the end of its life. It's no longer as efficient. And of course, it's still burning something. So by taking that out and putting in this air source heat pump, which takes heat from the air and doesn't emit things, it doesn't burn, essentially, it just uses a small amount of electricity to run. We're reducing those emissions and also reducing our energy costs as well. We're swapping out the lighting there. So we've got some quite old lighting in the education centre. We're upgrading that to LED. And we'll be upgrading the windows and doors to make it insulated, to make it tighter, to make, again, that air source heat pump be more efficient in the way that it can run. We're also swapping over our vehicles. We've got little buggies on the site that go around with the rangers, with the tools to do all the work. They are diesel fueled. They will go around the park, they will admit. So we are swapping them over to electric vehicles, which is not only better from a point of view as emissions, but also from a point of noise pollution. So for the wildlife, the animals and the visitors there, they won't be as disturbed because the noise isn't quite as loud. We've also switched over to some electric tools. So there's a photo there that you can see on the bottom right-hand side, the strimmers and the mowers. Those are new electric tools. They were actually purchased for us by our volunteer group, so the Friends of Rushcliffe Country Park. They donated some of the money that they generate through their fundraising activities to purchase those tools. And they've been brilliant because, again, not only are they not using petrol to run, they're also a lot quieter. They're also a bit lighter, a lot easier to use, more ergonomic. There's a lot of benefits to them. And so they very kindly purchased them for the council, and they are now being used at the park. And we're also bringing in some electric vehicle charging stations there, so that when our visitors come to the park, we're encouraging people who do have those electric vehicles to come over, to have a nice walk around the park, to enjoy the scenery, to shop in the cafe, and to charge their vehicle at the same time.
I think we really can't undersell that point in terms of the Friends, because we set out in terms of the vision, in terms of the change in the redevelopment, to have it as a net neutral site, and then to use that learning that we've taken from that redevelopment as our first project, which we can roll out across our own estate. But how fantastic it's been to have the Friends come on that journey and to say, well, we want to replace the power tools that you use with electrical alternatives, and they've invested that money in that. So it's been really positive, and work is starting on that. The substantive education centre and cafe concession next week. So we've done a lot of preparation in phase 1 and phase 2 in making vehicle entrances and new storage containment. So it's imminent in terms of the work starting on that site.
Thank you. No, it's okay. And I know it's an aside from the management plan, but it's worth noting that this year was our 15th year in receiving the Green Flag Award for that park. So 15 solid years. And that was made possible by the work of the Friends, the volunteer groups who come and maintain the park, and the rangers who do their day duties there. They keep that park immaculate and beautiful, which is why it's worthy of that award. And just one other note, again, aside from the management plan, we also brought in an additional £40,000 of funding this year for the park, specifically to install a changing places toilet. So a very accessible toilet that's greater than the current accessible toilets that you have, where it's simply sort of pull down arm to help people use the bathroom, it's larger door. These have full harnesses and hoists in them, so that for people who have more severe mobility issues, their carers or whoever can take them in can change them there in a dignified and proper way, so they're not having to go home when they need to. So it's going to be a really good improvement. So as well as becoming a more sustainable park, we're becoming a more accessible park too, which is really positive for the future of Rushcliffe Country Park. Sorry, I went a little off piece there. I think going to the next area I was talking about, conservation. So a really important part of the Rushcliffe Borough is our green spaces, because those spaces that we have will work towards our offsetting. So whilst we are working to reduce our emissions as much as we can as a borough, as a council, we will always come to a point where there's just something we can't reduce, we can't eradicate, we will need to offset that. And it's really important to have those green spaces to be able to do that, to be able to plant more trees, meadows, marshland if necessary. And also, as we know, climate change is causing a huge impact. It's causing large amounts of biodiversity loss. And we need to do everything we can to start reversing that now. And I think everybody is aware of the importance of that. So it's not, so it really can't be like oversold how important biodiversity and conservation is. So some of the stuff that's happened in this past year in terms of what are we doing to improve that biodiversity? Well, firstly, we've got a tree scheme. So we've delivered 1,361 trees have been delivered to Rushcliffe groups and residents through our tree scheme over the past year. And that's sequestered or removed from the atmosphere over 2 tons of CO2. And that'll be per year. Those trees, they'll be planted, they will live, they will carry on removing that CO2. So it's been a really good uptake from the residents in wanting those trees and having places to plant them. So that's fantastic. Our summer pollinator scheme, or commonly referred to as no-mow, areas around the borough that we've previously perhaps mown and kept short, we've now started allowing it to grow long. We've kept the mowing around the edges to keep it neat, to keep it tidy, to keep it visually attractive. But where we can, we've allowed areas, verges, large swathes of field to grow, to go to seed, to become grassland. And it supports those insects, the wildlife, the birds that are out there. And in addition to that, that extra growing, again, it sequesters CO2. It takes the carbon out of the atmosphere, which is carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. We've covered over 1.4 hectares has been covered by these no-mow sites. So it's quite a large, it's lots of little areas, but when you add it up, it's a large area that benefits the environment. The right-hand side picture there is a little picture of a little sign that goes up. It says, "Please excuse the weeds, we're feeding the bees," just to engage with the public and let our residents know what it is that we're doing. We've also got a wildflower scheme. So 1,500 packets of wildflower seeds have been distributed across the borough, so people can do this themselves. They can plant their own little wildflower meadows in their back garden or on their patch of land. And there's been good take-up of that. All those seeds have been distributed. We also did a butterfly exhibition in the arena on April 21st. People were invited to come in to see, to colour and see beautiful butterflies, and they would go through talks about butterflies, about the impact climate change is having on them and their decline, and just about their nature and how important they are to the general biodiversity. In addition to this, we own and manage 5 of the 8 designated nature reserves in the borough. Now, some 10 years ago, there weren't many nature reserves at all in the borough. So these have now recently been designated nature reserves. I can't stress enough, this is actually the result of having an ecologist. So we are one of the few councils that have our own designated ecologist. Paul, you've probably met him. And that's his work. He's been working with friends of groups to manage these sites in such a way that they can become designated nature reserves. And it's a lot of hard work and time has gone into building those. And it's been a fantastic thing. It's meant that when all this legislation is coming through now about biodiversity, we're already in a good place and we already know what we have and what we're going to be doing with it. So yeah, we a significant number. We also help and work with the Nottingham Wildlife Trust for other nature reserves, the ones we don't own, but we help and support the Wildlife Trust in how they manage them across the borough. And we have that really strong relationship with the Wildlife Trust. The land we currently own as a council currently sequesters just over 1,700 tonnes of CO2 every year. And we want to increase that number. We want to we want to look at perhaps buying more land to plant more trees on. And we can look at those things in the future, like how do we get to that point where we've offset whatever emissions we weren't able to reduce in the first place. And then the other circle in that chart at the beginning, the other side of things, is the community. We can't do this alone. So if we're talking about, earlier we were talking about our 2030 target, but going forward, we've got to start planning for that net zero by 2050. We cannot do that alone. We need to support and engage the community. We need them to be taking actions, and we need to be also leading them and helping them to take those actions. So what kind of things have we been doing? Well, like I said earlier, we've been rolling out electric vehicle charging points to encourage people to buy electric cars or to transfer over to electric cars when the time comes. There are 7 different charging sites across the borough with 21 individual charging points. These have gone in this year. We managed to secure £760,000 from the Nottingham City's transforming funding stream for these electrical vehicle charging points, and an additional 60,000 to put in a new substation at Gresham Pavilion. Western Power actually were kind enough to provide the new substation at West Bridgford free of charge. So that saved us money, which was very good of them. And those are some of the areas that you're currently looking at now: Keyworth, Radcliffe-on-Trent, Cotgrave, West Bridgford, Ganston. You can charge your electric vehicle here at the arena where we are now. And there'll be additional, there's going to be, there'll be 34 in total by the end of 22. So Chapel Lane is going to be one of the next ones to go through. And also, as I said, Rushcliffe Country Park will be getting some electric vehicle charging points in the near future. We've also created a hub. So this was opened this year, very recently at Gampston Hub. So we've got a solar power, that big roof that you can see in the picture there, that is a huge solar panel, and that powers those electrical vehicle charging points. So you can get to 80% full charge in just 30 minutes. So you can turn up, plug in, have a coffee, get back to your car and go. And it will charge up to 100 vehicles per day. And roughly 98% of that charging will be entirely natural light, sunlight. So really not creating any emissions at all at that point, which is fantastic. And we need to see about where else can we do this? Where else are we able to put these kind of hubs, these kind of canopies in? Let's talk about supporting our businesses. So we've got something called the Big Business Carbon Club. We invited all the big businesses within the borough to join in with a group with us. It's mostly meetings, but it's to share best practice. So when we talked about how we worked with Artex about the fuel, that came from the Big Business Carbon Club. So they were already on it. They were already doing that with the HVO, and they supported us. They gave us help. They told us how to access it, how to use it, gave us those ideas. So it was a fantastic thing that came out of that. And there's a lot of best practice sharing. And well, we've got to baseline our scope 3 emissions. How are you going about it? And we'll put on presentations and invite other companies in. So we had a presentation from a company called CO2 Analysis who came in to tell us about one particular way you could go about baselining those scope 3 emissions. Because I think most companies are struggling with scope 3, and it's something that we're going to have to think about, putting our baseline and reducing those scope 3 emissions. So the things you buy in, essentially, your staff's commuter miles, all that kind of thing that falls under that. And all the companies, it seems, are actually having quite similar struggles in terms of what do we do next? What does this legislation mean? How are you getting your staff engaged? And it's been brilliant to share those ideas, to share the platforms people are using, the communications. We also have a newsletter that goes out that shares articles relating to carbon reduction from the different businesses. So there'll be 2 or 3 articles, but all from different places, and we'll send it out to all of them so you can see what the big businesses in your area are doing to reduce their emissions and what sort of projects and plans they've got on. So you can link up. If you're doing something similar, why not talk to them, share ideas, or even perhaps look into going into projects together where you're purchasing things together, reduce the costs and increase the amount that you can get out of it. So it's been really successful in terms of that support. And the next step in regards to that is then how do we get to the SMEs, the smaller businesses, encouraging those big businesses to work with their suppliers as well in a similar sort of way to sort of get them on that carbon journey, if you like. Green Rewards was launched. This is a platform for our residents. So if you are a resident in Rushcliffe Borough Council, you can access this platform. You log your green activities, if you like. So you log when you've cycled to work, you log when you've done your recycling. You build up points. As they say, points make prizes. And in this case, that is the case. So at the end of the month, we have a prize draw. Someone wins a voucher. There's also, you can also get vouchers if you earn so many points. So if you earn, say, 10,000 points, you can get 20% off at your local takeaway, for example. So it gives people that initiative to, one, go, I'll leave the car at home today and earn some more points, because then on Friday, I can get 10% off my takeaway down the road. And then it encourages them also to shop locally as well, because those vouchers, we've kept them all local within the borough. Now, the interesting thing about this Green Rewards platform is we did not do it alone. So we have partnered with all the other local councils that we've got down there. So 9 of us in total have partnered together, 9 separate councils working together on a single project. It was absolutely incredible, the enthusiasm that everyone held. So every one of those councils listed there, they've all got their own version of this. So their residents can log on and they can get discounts in their local area and they can earn points. It's been really positive and we've had some really good uptake. It was only launched in September and we've already got 170 users and over 2 million points earned. So they're being really active in there. Sorry, I have to be honest. And we've done that again in conjunction with a company called Jump. So they host the platform for us, and they hosted a similar platform previously for universities. This is the first time in the UK something this has been used by a council. So it was really exciting to sort of deliver. And the other thing is it makes for a great engagement platform. So we can put information out there for our residents to access about what they can do to reduce their own carbon footprint, and we can update it and change it as time changes. So it's a really good communications tool, as well as being something that can help people reduce their carbon footprint. In terms of other proactive actions we're taking in terms of the community, now the local authority delivery scheme funding came out, or warmer homes scheme, whatever you're more familiar with calling it, LAD 2. So this was last year's round of funding. So this was funding made available by the government for councils to deliver in their local areas to provide energy reduction measures. Things like external wall insulation, solar, PV, loft insulation. We were granted over £600,000 worth of funding, which we have delivered over the past year in the East Leek area. Now, the reason for the East Leek area is there's quite a few houses there of non-traditional construct, so the ones made of metal. They are incredibly inefficient. Anyone who lives in one will tell you they are incredibly inefficient. They are cold because of the nature of the structure. So operate on a worst first approach, insulating those homes that are the coldest, the hardest to heat. We went to East Leek and we had really great uptake. We've had 57 residents' homes receiving measures. There was a large uptake of external wall insulation, which can have a huge impact. We say if you are insulating your home or if you're upgrading your home, fabric first. Go for the loft insulation, go for the wall insulation, make your home cozy. because that will reduce your bills and that will reduce your carbon footprint. And it has been really meaningful. We're here today talking about carbon, about the carbon management plan and about carbon footprints. I can honestly tell you that there are very few residents who particularly cared about the carbon credentials of these installations. They cared about how warm it was making them. They cared about the fact that their bills, which had been sky high, were reducing. They cared about the fact that it made their homes cozier, more comfortable to live in, that they didn't have to worry about going into fuel poverty. The emotional impact that it had on the residents living in these houses was so important. And I'm going to go, all this was done, we couldn't have done it on our own. We have done it in partnership. So the Nottingham Energy Partnership, they're a charity. They're wonderful. If you ever have any of your residents or constituents come to you to say, I'm struggling with my energy, what do I do? Refer them to the Nottingham Energy Partnership, because they don't just work with us. They will tell them any funding that's available to them, any schemes that are out there that they can access, any money that they could be entitled to. They will help them. So if you do have anyone struggling, I urge you to get them to contact them on Nottingham Energy Partnership. They've been wonderful as a charity. And the Nottingham City Council Energy Services, now called the Net Zero Hub. Again, so much support in terms of how we deliver this. How's it going to work? Where do we take it? How do we report it? How are we compliant with the rules of the funding? They have been an enormous support. And in this particular round of funding, we partnered with E.ON Energy Company, who are our delivery partner, who are the people on the ground actually installing that installation that you can see before you in that picture. They've been wonderful in terms of feedback. They've been really great with our residents in terms of answering questions. So it's been a really positive experience for those residents. I'm going to go on to the next slide in a minute. There's a video I want you to watch. This video is an interview. It's an interview with a lady who had her house insulated. She had external wall insulation and solar PV. And she was interviewed by the BBC News. And I just think it's a really lovely, impactful, and it says it better than I could say myself, of the impact of these measures. So there, from one of our residents in the East League area there, big thanks to Julie for doing that interview and agreeing to do that interview for the BBC. The other lady you saw talking there was Miranda. She works for the Nottingham Energy Partnership, and again has been absolutely invaluable in helping us deliver this scheme. And I can't thank her enough for the support that she has been providing on this, as well as the rest of the team over at the NEP. So yeah, really meaningful to people's lives, this, not just our carbon plan. Oh. So I've given you some of the highlights of what we've been doing over this year. I'm going to go through now what is next for 22-23. So what is the plan for this year? What are our next priorities and what should we be focusing on as a council? So as I've already mentioned, we've said we are going to be net zero by 2050. We need to plan for that. We need to update our carbon management plan or have a second one, which has those actions that include the community, businesses, transport, fleet as well in there. It's no longer just scopes 1 and 2 emissions, and it is no longer just our own emissions we've got to focus on. So that's going to be the big thing for this year, is planning that out. It's 2050 seems a lot of years away, but it'll come at us quick, and we need to have that plan in place and ready. There's just some information there on, you know, what a net zero strategy looks like, and it does show you, if you look at the picture on the right, that picture of the earth and all things going into it, it is everything. It is houses, businesses. It is in the transport, how we get around. It's in how we produce energy and how we produce food. It is in everything we do. So it's a lot to think about and a lot to plan for, and we need to be prepared for that. As they mentioned in that video we just watched, that we would have a lot of interest after that BBC article news piece went out. We did. We had a lot. We had a lot of people contacting us saying, I'm desperate, I want this too, please come and help me, please put my house on the list. So as a result, we have a waiting list, and we've been very fortunate. This year, we have been allocated additional funding under LAD 3, so Local Authority Delivery Scheme, third round. And also something called HUG funding, so the home upgrade grants. So LAD 3 focuses on energy reduction on properties that are connected to the gas grid, essentially, so centralised properties. HUG is really specific, it's for off-gas properties, so things you might find quite rural who are still connected to like a liquid fuel tank for their heating. So it's a specific pot of money for those. We've allocated quite a bit more this time. So we've got a total of £847,000 to deliver. We're going back to the East Leak area. The reason for this is we've decided these rounds of funding are likely to keep coming. And we've decided 2 years in each area is about right. The first year you go in, you say to people, we want to give you all this stuff for free, and some will sign up. Some will not believe you that what you're offering is free, and rightly so, it's the world we live in. But when they see it being built, when they see their neighbours' houses getting insulated, receiving solar, they contact us. And at that point, that's when we create the waiting list. So we now have a large waiting list for East Leak, and we still have some of those non-traditional construct properties that we need to go in and insulate, those steel framed houses, which are the most vulnerable to heat loss. So we're going back for another year before moving on to a different area, and we will be taking those worst first approaches. So we'll be going where we can make the most impact in terms of reducing our emissions, and where we can make the most impact in terms of reducing fuel poverty.
And that's just a really important point. It's a worst first approach. So it's not that we're choosing a specific area. The housing type that Laura's described in that area is the area that needs the most help in terms of bringing the banding of a grade E and F property up to a grade C or D, and especially with the cost of living crisis in those type of properties, its consumption is huge. If I'm just one point on when we're scrutinising this evening, we're looking at our carbon action management plan for our own operations by 2030. These allocations of funding have come in year, and if you know that granular focus, if you wanted to focus on our own operations, is something that we wouldn't prioritise. However, having £1.5 million worth of investment into our properties, which helps achieve that 2050 target and really tackles our residents, means it's something that we couldn't not prioritise in terms of our work programme. So it's really important that we lever in this external funding, even if it is, even if it does slightly take our focus off our own operations, because it's really important to have that duality of priorities as we move forward into the future. Sorry.
That's okay, thank you. So yeah, one of the other questions probably would be who's delivering the scheme. Again, we're going with E.ON for this round of funding because they're already in the area. We already have their contractors in the area. So ideally they can walk from one roof to the other and begin installing. So we've got that continuity. We've also got that continuity of customer journey. So the people in that area that perhaps weren't able to get in the LAD 2 scheme, they've been talking to those contractors from Eon and are being moved into the LAD 3. So we are delivering that through a framework to have them go back out and essentially continue with the work they're currently doing. So they're currently finishing up now in the LAD 2 phase. They will go seamlessly into LAD 3. This is really important because the administration burden, if you like, brought on by the LAD funding in terms of being able to manage it, get new contractors, get contractors in, get it set up, get new people, get their applications in. We've already done half of that. We've already got some applications in. We've already got people on the wait list. We've already done some basic assessments. So we're already in a good place. And this is important because there are other councils who are struggling with that administration burden. They simply don't have the capacity to meet it, though they desperately want to. And as a result, they are having to turn down funding. We are not. We are in a really good, strong place where we are accepting this funding. And hopefully further down the line in a few months' time, if it seems like we're doing a good job in terms of the rollout, we may even be in a position to go back and say, can you give us some more? We've got more we can do. So we are, by doing it the way we've done, we're in a really good, strong place. And it gives us a strong sort of 2-year cycle in each area to really make some tangible improvements.
And in terms of supply chain as well, because it's a really important component, availability of contractors and people to be able to actually do these installations is really, really important. And a large player like Eon, who has that complete supply chain of contractors already signed up and working to them, means that we've got more certainty about availability, because these are quite tight timeframes in terms to deliver and administer that funding, and to have a multidisciplinary teams that are able to do all of those measures from their supply chain is really, really important to us in moving that forward.
Okay. So in terms of what other work are we going to be doing this coming year? Energy audits and live monitoring. So really exciting, getting back to basics, talking about data, understanding our own properties, our own assets. So we're going to be having a targeted plan for going out and finding out what is the carbon footprint of each of our assets, which are the worst, which are the most inefficient, which need the upgrades first, and have that targeted plan for, okay, this property is the worst, so what are we going to do about it? Are we going to upgrade it? Are we going to improve it? Are we going to sell it to another company who can upgrade it much better than us and perhaps move things out of there? It's a possibility, like we did when we moved to the arena, for example, because it was the right thing to do. But certainly, how are we going to insulate, improve the energy of these buildings? By doing these audits, by having that firm understanding of where we currently stand, it also gives us the opportunity to have off-the-shelf projects. So when lines of funding are made available from government sources, we're actually in a position to go, I have a building, it needs an air source heat pump, and it also needs the associated insulation. And we know the building's this big, so we know it's going to cost this much. So we need this much funding, please. Because some of these funding applications, it can be quite a tight turnaround to get that kind of information in a short space of time. If we've got little off-the-shelf projects ready to pick out, it means as well as paying for the work to be done ourselves and out of the budgets we already have, we can access that funding and do more. We'll also be able to identify quick wins for carbon and cost saving. By doing these audits, do we perhaps find out that actually there's a window jammed open in one room that hasn't been shut for years because no one's gotten around to it and it's just leaking air out of it? These little things, these quick wins can actually have quite a big impact, especially if you're talking about across an estate of assets. On the back of that, we'll plan for installing live energy monitoring at appropriate sites. So for example, at leisure centres or at some of our larger buildings, this live energy monitoring will provide us with data. Data is great, data is wonderful because it tells you the energy you're using. And then when you do install an energy reducing measure, whether it be LED lighting or new insulation, you can look at your data and you can go, I know the impact of that. That was successful. I can see where that changed. And you can work out actually how much did I save? How much carbon has that reduced? How much money has that saved me? So what is the cost analysis for this, and how you justify it for then other buildings say, actually, we installed this here. It pays for itself in 3 years' time. Of course, we're going to then roll it out to our other sites. The other wonderful thing about live energy monitoring is it tells you things that nothing else can. So for example, our staff going home at the end of the day, and is there a plan for who actually turns off the lights? Because if there isn't, quite a lot of the time, those lights get left on the whole time. And everyone assumes someone else turned them off. And in the morning, everyone assumes someone turned them on. But perhaps they're just on 24 hours a day and you don't know. That live monitoring can tell you things like that. It can also tell you if you've got leaks, if there's something running that shouldn't be running. And you can use that not just for energy, but for water as well. At a place where I used to work, we actually installed live water monitoring. We discovered an underground leak, a leak that was going from under the building straight into a sewerage drain. So it didn't cause a puddle, you didn't see it. That leak, and they were only having to read the meter once every 3 years. We were in the middle of that 3-year period. Already in that point, that leak had wasted nearly £90,000 worth of water. Another 90,000 would have been wasted at the point of the next meter reading when we'd have found out that it was happening. So these things can be incredibly valuable at not wasting those precious resources, but also telling you what is happening with my buildings, with my assets. So we want to go down that route. Of course, in terms of training, we want to make sure that all our staff are on board with what we're doing. We want to make sure they understand the importance of these carbon reduction activities, and we want to become a carbon literate organisation. You probably all noticed recently that the city announced themselves as the first carbon literate council, and that's where we want to go. What are we aiming to do this year? Councillors and staff at certain roles, so appropriate roles, people who are perhaps head of properties or are heading up projects, etc., will all be carbon literacy trained. So that 1-day course. We're lucky, we're going to have our own in-house trainer. So our ecologist Paul is going on the train the trainer course, and the role that I'm in will be trained as a trainer as well. So we'll be able to deliver that easily and effectively in-house. All Rushcliffe Borough Council staff will receive some form of carbon awareness training. So we want to put together a package, a short package, perhaps half an hour to an hour long, that everybody does at least once, and then it will form part of the induction, so that every person that comes into the council to work with us knows these are our objectives. This is what you need to do to help us reduce our carbon footprint. Then we want to work at going out to the parish councils and have specific packages for the parish councils, so they understand how to become a carbon literate parish and what they can do to help us, again, reduce those emissions. And we talked about the Big Business Carbon Club earlier. We've even worked source some additional training for them. It's not in the carbon literacy, it's in that climate fresque there, which is a brand new form of climate-based training. It's done in a card form. It's very interactive. It's wonderful for groups and for businesses that are getting together in that kind of way. It's an interactive sort of game, if you like, but it's really engaging, and it gets that message through about climate change and about carbon reduction, but it takes you through the entire supply chain, so you can actually understand the whole thing. And we'll be delivering that in May at the next meeting of the Big Business Carbon Club. We've got a cycling and walking plan that's coming out this year. So we're aiming to raise awareness. We want the public to know where the safe cycling and walking paths are, and integrate those cycling and walking activities with events, initiatives, programs within the council as part of our health and sports event action plan activities. And working with Nottinghamshire Road Safety Partnership on campaigns and promoting that safe and green cycling and walking options. We need to develop our infrastructure. We need to look at our infrastructure in the borough and say, what can we do to make this more walking and cycling friendly, and produce comprehensive information of online mapping, so people actually know, if I take my bike out, can I get from A to B safely? And identifying additional routes that might be needed, perhaps on highways or greenways, and deliver that safer cycling infrastructure. And we're doing that working in partnership, partners with local businesses, to promote those walking and cycling opportunities, so they're promoting them within their businesses too, so people know how they can get to work on their bike or on their feet, for example, and supporting more walking and cycling training with schools. And working to develop policy, ensuring that Section 106 planning obligations are secured wherever possible, that deliver that walking and cycling infrastructure into those new planning applications, and ensuring cycling routes are considered whenever we're developing something. Again, it's about how people are getting in and out safely in something other than a car. So in terms of our fleet, we are going to be reviewing all our fleet this year. We're going to be taking a good hard look at everything we own, and this will include Streetwise. So as you know, Streetwise are coming back in-house, and their vehicles will come under our own fleet. So we need to look at them, assess them. What are we going to do? Where can we switch to electric vehicles instead of diesel and petrol? Where can we phase stuff out? Where can we make shorter journeys? Streetwise will become part of our Scope 1 emissions now. So again, it's already there within our target to reduce those emissions by 2030. So they're no longer one of our suppliers, they are us. And we'll be looking to work with our partners at the City Council to assist with this and to audit our fleet and have a good hard look at it. And there'll be a potential fleet manager post as part of that Streetwise waste restructure that's coming in. Further to the electric vehicle charging points we're talking about there. So what's this year going to look like in terms of that rollout? Well, the city's transforming funding part, it has now ended. So there's no more funding for electric vehicle charging. Doesn't mean we're not going to progress with it. There are other avenues to take. We have that climate change reserve that we have our own money set aside for, and we'll have other opportunities. But of the £760,000 funding we had from 21-22 period, we still have some left over, and we're using that still to support the infrastructure work at the Rushcliffe Country Park and at Gresham. So as I said, we are still delivering electric vehicle charging points there. There is no funding to continue out into West Bridgeford. It's called the West Bridgeford Nursery Car Park, but it's the back of Marks and Spencer's for those of you that know the area. But we are going to be putting EV charging there, so it's how do we go about that? But the City Council Transforming Cities Fund will still be fully funding the charging points for the Bingham Arena, which is still to be done. We have got some opportunities, perhaps under the newly announced Levi funding. We can consider a bid for the remaining sites. So those are at West Bridgeford Nursery, the M&S car park at the back of M&S. Homegrove, Gotham, there's a few of them there, and also at the new crematorium that we're putting in. So we have got some places sited up that we know will be good, really good places to put that EV charging in. There's going to be an electric vehicle showcase as well this year, held on the Croquet lawn on Central Avenue. So it'll be the green bit in front of all the shops is the Croquet lawn. I'm sure everyone knows that, but I only found it out this week, so I feel the need to share. That's what it's called. It'll be on Central Avenue on Friday the 3rd and Saturday the 4th of June. So companies are going to be coming to showcase their electric vehicles and what they can do. So it'll be of interest to the residents to see, actually, is it time for me to now upgrade to an electric vehicle? So it'll be a really positive event.
And that's a commercial operator that's hiring the Croquet lawn, but obviously feeds into this the narrative of obviously trying to get people to change their cars as well.
So what else is coming? Biodiversity net gain has just been released. Biodiversity net gain is a requirement within the National Planning Policy Framework and the Environment Act of 2021. And it requires developers and to manage land and leave that natural environment in a measurably better state than it was beforehand. So if you're going to a field and you're flattening it to put up 20 houses, you have to prove within your planning application that after you've put your houses up, what you've also done is going to leave that environment in a measurably better state than it was before. So it might be planting additional trees. It might be ensuring those green spaces in people's back gardens. It might be putting in things like bee bricks and bird houses. But your development cannot impact the environment that it's going in into a negative way. You have to have that net gain of biodiversity. And it's a minimum of 10%, and they have to maintain it for a minimum of 30 years. That has to be maintained. So whilst that's also the onus is on the developers, there's an onus on us as a council. How are we going to manage that? How are we going to enforce it? How are we going to make sure we're checking 29 years in the future that it's exactly as it was or better? So it's something to have to think about and something to plan for. And biodiversity duty. Again, we're talking a lot about biodiversity this year. It's all come out in the Environment Act. It's a big part of that Environment Act. So it's now a requirement for planning for public authorities to look strategically at our policies in regards to biodiversity every 5 years. So that's a huge task. We have to go through what land do we have that supports biodiversity? How does it support biodiversity and how are we managing it? And we have to produce those reports every 5 years. So again, it's going to be another thing that we have to resource. We have to plan and we have to think, how are we going to meet these requirements? And it can include things like restoring or enhancing habitats, populations, and you need to be seen to be having that growth and making sure those environments are becoming better, better habitats for biodiversity. And I know that's been a lot, and I appreciate that it is getting late on, so thank you for listening to me. I will take any questions that you have now.
Well, thank you very much, Laura, and to Derek. I mean, that was a very comprehensive presentation, you know, and your voice is still going at the end. That's always a good sign. But the energy and enthusiasm you showed was absolutely fantastic. I think before we go into the questions, I see after such a long presentation, just give everyone 5 minutes to really try to get a cup of coffee, and then we'll get cracking with all the questions. I imagine I've got quite a few, so I imagine others will do might be here for a while. So for the thousands watching on YouTube, you've got 5 minutes to go get a coffee. Don't go watching Everday. I'll come right back, and we'll see everyone in about 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, thank you everyone. We'll get cracking again with the meeting. So once again, thank you for the presentation to Laura and to Derek. So we are going to crack off with questions first of all. So I've got one to start off with. Out of my 10 I've got listed down, and we'll go around the room to be fair. Now, don't worry, I'm sure you'll cover 9 of them, so that will be a quick one. So it's around the electric car charging points, which I know we touched on towards the end of the meeting. Also, points been raised by one of our colleagues, Councillor Jen Walker, so who asked me to raise them this evening through the scrutiny matrix and to go through. So one of the first questions is, how is it decided where electric car charging point EV points are installed? And the second one is, how do communities and or parishes put in bids to have EV points in the car parks? So I'm going to bring Daryl to answer this one.
Thank you, Chair. So I think between myself and Derek, we're probably going to be able to answer all of these questions raised by Councillor Walker. And I'm quite happy for Derek to jump in as well. So with regards to where we site them, there's actually quite strict criteria around the funding and where we can put them. And some of the things I sort of noted down with regards to the funding is depending on where the funding comes from. They may ask that the charging points are close to a particularly strategic route or road, such as the A46 or the 453 or the 52. They look at areas where there's already charging points in, regardless of whether they are in our car parks or not. And they will also look at where people are buying and owners of electric cars as well. And there is a computer program that will tell people where there's heavy usage or ownership of electric vehicles. There's also, as much as we'd love to continue to roll out these, and we will be looking to continue to roll them out depending on future funding sources, we're very mindful at the moment that the focus has been on Gampston with the solar canopy hub, Cockgrave, Keyworth and Ratcliffe-on-Trent, to a much lesser extent Eastleigh, Bingham, Ruddington and West Bridgford. A lot of that is due to the funding, but it's also when we did apply for funding for Bingham, and we did apply for funding for Eastleigh. Unfortunately, it was turned down. Inadequate power supply, the general car park layouts considered, the location of street furniture and fencing is considered as well. So we have to, as I think Derek and Laura mentioned with regarding the LAD and the warm home funding, we have to grab this funding when we can. And Laura's highlighted we've put in over £750,000. We've had over £750,000 worth of funding to try and get these sites in locations as quickly as we can. If we go back 18 months, we had none. So we've done an awful lot of work on it, and I've no doubt there will be sort of future funding streams that we will be able to keep going. So it's not for want of trying that we haven't got them everywhere yet, but it's certainly our ambition to keep working on that so that we can get them across the borough as well. And also in West Bridgford, we put one in Gampston, but West Bridgford is difficult because of the power supply issues, and we are working with Western Power on a possible solution to that.
Thank you. And
that West Bridgford, so we have identified Gresham Sports Park because it meets the criteria. It's access to an A road, the trunk road in terms of Wilford Lane, but the energy supply, so it requires a substation on that site to enable that to take place. But it's obviously strategically located adjacent to 2 schools. So and it has its redevelopment has quite an increased level of usage. So that has been fantastic. And it's really down to the tenacity of the officer involved, the amount of funding that we've levered in comparison to the other boroughs and districts around Nottinghamshire, that we've been able to source external funding without having to dip into our reserve. So we've allocated some funding towards the Rushcliffe Country Park EV charging infrastructure. That £25,000 is allocated towards that. It's the first time we've had to do it, so there's been fully funded schemes, which has been fantastic in terms of the EV charging infrastructure that we've managed to get in the last couple of years.
thank you. And the last point raised before I go on to mine was what is this strategic plan for EV points in all our new homes and local government owned car parks, considering the rising cost of petrol and diesel? No, you just touched on just to tie that one up.
Yeah, so we have some meetings arranged with our city council colleagues who's been leading on this scheme. So there are soundings from government that they're going to make funding available. It is a challenge, obviously, because of people that don't have, if you take West Bridgford, for example, people that don't have immediate access to off-street car parking, and then how do we put that infrastructure on when we've got on-road parking? So there will be opportunities as a part of the Levi Fund and other funding sources that we will explore. And then it will be guided by national planning policy framework in terms of domestic premises, in terms of trying to ensure that infrastructure is available on new builds.
Great, no, thank you very much for those answers. Thank you, Councillor Walker, who put that in. And so my point is around the funding stream you talked about the Levi funding and the infrastructure going in. So appreciate that we may have a funding gap. It does seem that we really need to make sure we got that charging infrastructure in the middle of West Bridgford, especially. You know, I know the substation we put in, we've got those car parks there, and car parks such as Alfred Road, which has a lot of use, especially for the football teams there on a weekend and ones around there. So what contingency are we planning for? I know you talk about the cost, and it's obviously going to be £25,000, like you say, for the country park, but it seems to me that has to be quite high up on the agenda if we can't get that funding. So have we got a plan in place but if we can't get the funding stream for the Levi to budget to get that infrastructure in place?
So our carbon reserve is based on the business case and the return on investment. So if we've exhausted all our funding avenues, we'll look at our priority list of projects, and it's really about that return on investment has the biggest impact on our carbon, the economic case and the social value case for doing that. So it will be measured against that criteria. It will be tabled with EMT, and then it'll be for members to choose from where we want to invest that funding. So that's the process that we follow in the initial stages. If we can identify funding and quick wins, that is where we prioritise that funding. Sorry, Carol.
Sorry, Dave. I think the only thing I would add to that is I mentioned when the initial funding came through that we were keen to get them into Eastleigh and also Bingham. Bridgford Road car park opposite the co-op was a logical place to also apply for funding, which was turned down simply because I'm not an expert on power supply in West Bridgford, but I understand there's limited power supply, and the council have been working with Western Power looking at a solution to that. If Western Power are able to do something to improve the power supply, then hopefully we will be able to get them into Bridgford Road car park as well. And it's an ongoing piece of work we're doing. We've had another meeting with Western Power next week.
It's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and that is a huge infrastructure project, because we are underpowered in West Bridgford, and it is having an impact on the high street in terms of the businesses that can go into high streets if they've got power generation. A key component of that, in addition to the EV charging infrastructure, is about providing alternative. It's in the carbon management plan about our events. So we have, as you all know, we have got quite a number of events in the park and on the Croquet lawn. If for the farmers market that's powered by diesel generators, they're noisy, they're loud, they produce exhaust fumes. If we are able to get that substation infrastructure in, we'll be able to provide power supplies to Central Avenue and the Croquet lawn, which will mean that we'll be able to use, so we'll cut out that the noise, the carbon impact, and have a sustainable alternative, which will make those events far better and be able to better provide the infrastructure for that town as well in terms of the high street. So it goes beyond just EV chargers on its own.
And so a follow-up question really with the Western Power. So how confident are we that there'll be a solution found? I'm sure it's been many weeks from now. What the main obstacles? It's just the money side from them, or?
We're actively working on. We've identified a site on the Nursery Road car park for that, and we're doing services to the final phases of that. So we will, as soon as that is known and confirmed, we will report that back to this group and obviously take from there.
That's great. Thank you very much for this comprehensive answer. Appreciated. So
Just, well, no, just before we start, I'm not one to cause panic, but has the YouTube thing gone off? Because it's sort of, oh, that's fine then, okay. I'm not that I'm bothered about that, but no, there could be thousands of people watching. We don't want to, well, yeah, we don't want to be disappointed, but yeah. There's loads here, isn't there? I mean, I think I probably hadn't appreciated how much is going on, and it's really interesting to see, quite genuinely. First of all, one thing I did already know about, and you mentioned in your presentation, really just to give a big up here for the Nottingham Energy Partnership, which I still think probably isn't known enough about. The reason I say that is it's probably, well, a couple of years ago now, I had one of my residents who was struggling with a non-working boiler. They were literally, their house was freezing and their personal circumstances were such they couldn't really afford a new boiler. Took a bit of time, but eventually the NEP, the Nottingham Energy Partnership did come up trumps, and so it'd be good to keep an eye and see how they're doing in general, actually, because it's genuinely interesting. But on to a couple of things here. The East League project, which is fascinating, that external insulation. How obviously, well, I think I heard you say that there was probably more demand than was that we could help. So how did we decide who was in the pecking order, so to speak, for those? Was there sort of any particular criteria? And also, general, it's more of a technical question, but much as I'm fully supportive of this external insulation, because it's at the end of the day keeping houses warm, are we confident that we won't fall into a future problem that we had a few years ago, where there was cavity wall insulation put in lots of houses, and for one reason or another, whether it was rogue fitting or the houses weren't suitable, we then found some, well, not we, around the country, there were houses that suffered from damp or whatever as a result, so unintended consequences. So are we as confident as we can be that there aren't any potential unintended consequences of that, so the external insulation? And I know it's a technical question, but...
Yes, okay. No, thank you, Councillor Butler. You're absolutely right. To answer your first point in terms of criteria, yes, there is a criteria. So firstly, your property has to be below a certain level. It has to be sort of E-rated or below, though we will accept some D properties if we're not meeting our criteria. So there's that. So firstly, you have to have an inefficient property. The second thing is we go on vulnerability. So is there a risk of fuel poverty due to how much income is coming into the house? Are there children? Are there vulnerable elderly? Those will be taken into account when we're making these decisions. And we will prioritise in that order as best we can. There are always going to be people, unfortunately, and we have had to do it, that we've had to say, I'm sorry, we cannot fit you into this round of funding, so you will go onto the waiting list for the next one. But we do try and prioritise in that order. So the least efficient houses, where we can have the most impact, and then the most vulnerable people who we can help the most. And it is a hard decision to make. And it's going back to the NEP and their support. They help us. They do those assessments with our residents. And I have to say, sometimes they're the ones making the tough decisions. Thankfully, it's not often that it has to come to me to make that choice, which I'm grateful, eternally grateful to them for, because that is such a burden to want to help everybody and not be able to. In terms of how we decide what measures we're going to put in, external wall insulation is very expensive, and there is a cap on what each household can have, but the cap is averaged out. So in order to make it work, because external wall insulation is probably the best thing you can have in terms of insulation, in terms of reducing those bills, but it is also the most expensive, and it is over the cap. So average external wall insulation is about £23,000 for the area we're in and the type of houses. The cap is 10. So to make that work, we then have to deliver a lot of loft insulation, which is very low, sort of £1,000, £2,000, and that's how we even it out. But it does limit the number we can deliver, and that's one of the issues, I suppose, with the funding, is those strict rules behind those caps and various other things. Yes, you're trying to get the most out you can have your money, but it also prevents you perhaps doing the most important tasks. And that can be a frustration, but we have to, so what we do is we will try and maximise our most efficient measures. So we will go, right, what is the maximum, how many of these EWIs can we install? And then we go from there with the other ones, because we know it has the biggest impact. In regards to what you're saying about damp, absolutely spot on. So ventilation is part of the installation. We have to assess and review the installation. There's new regulations come out in the past 35 about how much ventilation you have to have in a property, and we take that into account. So additional vents will be put in. additional measures have to be taken depending on what boiler they've got. So there's a lot that goes into it, and that's where we rely on the technical expertise with E.ON. Perhaps what you were saying earlier about rogue builders or cowboy traders out there, there are some. They do go out, they do slap up big bits of foam board on the outside of a property. It doesn't last, it's not great. We don't have that. The experience we've had with E.ON is they are experts in this field, and that's why we trust them. Which is one of the reasons why they won the original contract, if you like, because they can deliver that, and because reputationally they are a big company, they are not small. Reputationally they are sound. So if there are any issues, they will go back, they will fix it. But so far so good, and like I said, that extra ventilation is going in to prevent those future issues that you talked about.
Just to add to those points, when we talk about the rating of a property in terms of the banding, it's the energy performance certificate. So in terms of E and F rated properties is really poor. But Laura's point about the measure mix, it's really important that we get that measure mix right, because if we do a measure that brings that property to a D brand property, it may frustrate future investment. So it's a really delicate balance to ensure, in terms of, we know that there's pipeline funding come along, that we might prioritize the ones that it'll obviously always be the worst first approach, but we need to make sure that we're not frustrating the process in enabling that person to be able to come and get future funding when funding's available. So it's a delicate balance, and that thing about that's why we're using the framework. That's why we're using it, is because they are using contractors that have been vetted, they've been through that standard process, so we don't get caught out in that process. So we're not managing the day-to-day installation process ourselves. That's where we've got a company like E.ON who's managing that process to give us. It's a risk mitigation to ensure that they're working with compliant contractors as a part of that process.
Yeah, the first is to congratulate officers really on being able to use the 1 year funding from the government, because it clearly is a problem that the government makes it that way, and you always get the sense that they're trying to claw back half of it. So well done for getting it and getting it used. The second point is you talked about carbon literacy training. In my view, is if you offered that to developers, it would maybe have more impact than it would internally, because I imagine a lot of staff are already converted, and developers clearly aren't. I really don't believe the 10% increase in biodiversity. I just find that a meaningless phrase, but it's very clear that apart from reducing water usage in new buildings, there's bugger all use of any ecologically and environmentally and emission friendly measures. So I just think that would have perhaps more impact than many other things. I'd be interested to know what measures can be taken by our leisure centres, because there's been mention of the great advances made at Bingham, but clearly you've already highlighted the extent of energy use at them. Do we know what steps can be taken and are taken? That's my first question.
I had 3 points. So the carbon literacy, I take your point on board. However, we in terms of embedded in the council, in terms of what we're working on in terms of the carbon management plan, we want to have staff as to join the authority to understand and to buy into that process, so it becomes the business as usual environment that we're as a part of our everyday working, that we're thinking about our carbon footprint. We want to roll that out to the parishes and boroughs, because we would love the parishes and town councils to be able to set their own net zero target, because it really it impacts on that 2050 target. So if we're all having our own carbon management plans, even if they're small parish or town councils, they will have an impact. In terms of biodiversity net gain, the 10% target, again, we take your point. It will be helpful to have those ecological assessments and to say how they're going to achieve that 10% biodiversity net gain or their proposals, and then that will be monitored over the period. So it will be good to understand what their proposals are, what the ecology of the site is prior to development, what the proposals is for the 10% net gain, and then have a measure against that to see how effective that is. In terms of the leisure centres, we have a leisure strategy, and we have been working through the leisure strategy in terms of this building, Bingham Chapel Lane, as the oldest leisure centre within our portfolio that is being replaced as a part of that. We are doing a leisure strategy review at the end as over the course of the next year. And the two outstanding buildings, that the two leisure centres that we're looking at as a part of that process is Cochrane Leisure Centre and Keyword Leisure Centre. So they're the next in the portfolio. We will be looking through a lens, how do we improve those centres as leisure centres, but how do we reduce its carbon footprint as a part of that redevelopment and as a part of that capital programme. So really driving down those costs are really important as part of that process.
So that'd be quite an important feature for this committee and scrutiny group.
Yeah, so we will, as a part of that that leisure strategy. So as I said, there's an adopted strategy from 2017 to 2027. This will be a midpoint review during the second half of this year, and then we'll establish Cochrane and Keyword and how we wish to propose, and that will come to members in terms of what that will look like. But obviously included within that carbon management and reduction of the energy costs of our own estate as a part of this journey is a key plank within that process.
The last 2 points are connected really. In 4.9 it talks about appropriate solutions on a case-by-case basis, and it gives an example of multiple solar voltaic installation across several properties rather than building by building. And what does that mean? Is there an actual example of what we're going to do there? And secondly, is there scope to promote community groups running their own micro generation schemes?
So initially, that specifically refers to, we looked at all our community venues and seen if we could bulk buy in terms of all of the venues. That was a high level, so we've got a measure for that, but it's quite a high level document. I think what we need to do now is to drill down to that second level of detail in terms of those individual buildings. In terms of the bulk buying scheme, it's not something, as this is a long-term plan. As we said, we've prioritized our energy audits and our transport for the priorities. This will happen over the 8 years of those. So at the moment, our priority is transport and our estate, and then we will look at those. So it's just about what capacity we've got with the programme. So it's not something that we've explored in great detail at this point.
I'll just pick up on the fact it was used as an example in the report, but the second point is, I mean, we've not got great river flows on great velocities for people to do hydroelectric, but I guess the scope for community groups to get together with their own solar scheme or wind farm scheme, and are we promoting that, and are there any examples in the borough of that?
That one. Oh, sorry. So as things currently stand, no, there's no examples I can demonstrate to you here today, but it is something we want to look at. So the council has been doing a lot as we've gone through in regards to what we're doing. It's now how about we get out into those communities, work with those community groups, work with our parishes to do that joined up thinking, to have those schemes. And we do need to support them in that journey, but we are very much at the beginning of that. So it is now starting to look at the facing outwards from beyond just the council itself. So that's why that's on that plan, because it is an ambition, it is a target, it's something we're working towards. So no, unfortunately, I don't have one that I could demonstrate to you that's currently existing, because they don't. But down the line, we have to start thinking about those strategic joined up actions that we can do, because none of us can do this in isolation, and that's sort of what we've realized. So that's why it is part of the plan.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed earlier on there was an item in there for procurement, right? Do building materials come in procurement? Is that considered?
Bill of materials for our own estate, or bill of materials for as in the residents in the community?
Well, in your estate, I saw in the first place that you did a slide or show of Rushcliffe Oaks, and I could see steel posts in that. And to manufacture steel, it comes from China anyway. It's very not carbon neutral, but carbon neutral. I also saw a lot of concrete there, and apparently, it depends who you listen to, but between 10 and 20% of the world's carbon dioxide is from the production of cement, i.e. concrete. And also bricks. Bricks are calcined clay, and it takes a lot of gas and or electricity to manufacture these. And a lot of these are coming in from Belgium now. Some are manufactured in this country. India as well is a good supplier of bricks. Why isn't, or why not, engineered timber considered for this, for posts and for the lintels and beams, etc.? Concrete, okay, we're looking at, I just mentioned to Councillor Butler here, many of us can remember years ago, the streets of Nottingham were paved with York stone. And then parts of it were replaced with concrete slabs, etc. They all get broken, they don't last very long, and now they're all being replaced again now with York stone again, and that's in the streets of Nottingham. Why aren't we using more more natural building materials, i.e. the timber I just spoke about? What about if anybody that lives here in West Bridgford, particularly in one of the older houses built prior to about 1920, they've all got stone facades, they've got stone bay windows. Okay, there are some bricks there, a lot of it's brick, but there's stone bay windows, and all of the walls are built with limestone, which is captured carbon. It's fossilized sunshine, it's carbon free, there's no or very, very, very little energy in the manufacture of this, and also it can be manufactured locally to support our businesses rather than Chinese businesses, Belgian businesses, or foreign businesses, or any Europe. But you get where I'm going. There's a lot of evidence of this in West Bridgford, not all around the county, for natural and durable building materials. And I think really it ought to be explored more.
Thank you. I suppose what I'd say in terms of it's a process, it's a journey rather than a destination in terms of our build estate. So it requires a sea change from the supply chain and the builders to be able to move away from the more traditional type construction activities, and we have to fit it within return for investment. So we could be more innovative in that, but we have to obviously there's a cost implication in that. So it's about trying to find that balance in terms of our redevelopment and our commercial portfolio, and working with our estates team. So we want to go on that journey, but it's sometimes it's a more difficult one in terms of using innovative techniques or techniques that have been used in the past in terms of what we've got in new or current building practices. So it's about pushing that envelope really in terms of moving forward, and within within a financial envelope to try and deliver these schemes to have a payback in terms of what we're doing. So if you look at the Rushcliffe Oaks scheme, I know what you're saying, but we've got green roofs, we've got lots of carbon technology within that to reduce the cost of it. But it's very difficult to make a completely carbon neutral building using all of those business practices without it being very expensive to deliver a scheme. Yeah.
Right. I have stonemason myself. I see this all over the place. I see it everywhere. But if you go out, some quite biggish housing projects are going up in Waltham on the Wolds, and there's a lot of limestone there being used. So I know that's sort of Leicestershire, but they're doing it and they can do it. And if you go over into Lincolnshire, almost everything, Ali, and there's limestone. They're building on limestone. So and they can do it as well. You know, it's a poor excuse if we can't, particularly on places like Rushcliffe Oaks and Bingham Leisure Centre. This was raised up, you know, to me a couple of years ago. You know, what, you know, and these individual buildings, why can't, or even this place, you know, but these two in particular, why can't they use stone there? You say it's expensive or think it's expensive. It's not expensive in Leicestershire, or it's not expensive in Lincolnshire. And also at that point of use, it's the cheapest it's ever going to be. And also you'll notice that lots of limestone or building stone can be recycled over the years. You can't do that with concrete.
I think you have some excellent points, Councillor, especially with your experience. And I know it's not really Derek's area. I don't want to put Derek on spot. I know Derek will do obviously best to answer, and it's not. Yeah, but I think what might be best is if you could feed those comments back the team to look at. And I think especially my observation would be if there is the cost implication, the two options on the table, and that's up to cabinet and obviously council to decide how they want to budget it, and then we make that a real call. But I think there's some good points there made. But I do appreciate that area expertise. So if you're okay with that, I'll stick with that. We'll go with that. Thank you much.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for a very, very full and comprehensive report as well. There's an awful lot there. Just interesting, just picking up on what you were just saying, Councillor. There's a lot of interesting sort of expertise sort of within the councillors, you know, from people with different backgrounds who have a lot of things to bring forward like that. So I didn't know this. A lot of this about limestone. It was really interesting. There's quite a lot of things been already covered that I was going to sort of raise a point, so I'll pick and choose a couple of others if I may. One was about the country park, which I think sounds really, really good. It's fantastic. There's so much work being done there, especially due to a number of folks I know who were saying about the toilets as well. And yeah, an upgrade is long overdue there, particularly for accessibility. One of the question was how much we're telling people who are visiting there about this, because otherwise it's not going to be sort of things that people they'll notice something's new and it's different. So are we going to be telling people all about it? And that kind of goes to a wider issue. I know we make sort of, you know, play this in Rushcliffe reports, but I think that there is a real messaging opportunity here to sort of go and tell our residents about all the things that we're doing and things that we can help them with and things that they are probably going to have to go ahead and do on their own at some point as well. And I think we've got to do a lot of signposting for our residents across the whole of the borough as to how they can sort of do their bit and say, we're doing our bit. This is how we're going to enable you to do some things. And these are some other things that you might want to consider as well. So I think there's a really big communications thing to do around that. I think that's really, really important. Stuff about NEP and community energy. There's a thing called Nottinghamshire Community Energy that NEP have been involved with, are involved with as well. Disclaimer: I'm part of that, so that's a really good one. So they have a solar farm out in the same sort of. No, it's not so long. There's not so long. So that's a really good thing that's been involved with. I'm very interested to hear about how you're looking at sort of rolling out the EV charging. I know it's not like the be all and end all of
mobility for the future. And I think we have to do a lot more to sort of say to people, look, you need to make some kind of shift. You can't just wait for everything to be turned into an electric car or even a hydrogen powered car or fuel cell car, because that's not going to solve the problem ultimately. You have to get more people out there sort of, you know, walking and cycling. And this entire room was full to bursting just last night with people talking about social prescribing and how it's, you know, reducing the cost on the health service by getting people to be more active, but to be more healthy. And we have people from all the sort of different healthcare groups in here talking about that last night. So I think there's that element to it as well that we need to be putting across. And there was one other question that I was going to ask. So we've talked about obviously the waste wagons, the large ones can't be sort of done wholly electric. I know the city council have got one, but it's not going to cover us for the distances we've got. But we do have a lot more smaller vehicles, for what you want to call transit class ones, who are doing pickups, bin emptying, that kind of thing. I think there is scope for making those switch to to electric, and is that something that we're going to do anyway?
So thank you, really valid, really good questions. So to answer your first one about the country park and communication, as things are currently going on, we have got a redevelopment project going on there. We have big diggers and all those sorts of things on site. So we're not communicating too widely. We're letting people who are visiting know, but we don't really want an influx of people coming to the park right now because they'll be faced with mud pits and diggers, and that's not what we want to present. But when it's done, when it's finished in a few weeks' time or a couple of months' time, we are having a big open day. We're going to be inviting all the local residents, so through our own communication channels, through our online channels, and through the physical pamphlet that we produce. We'll be inviting residents. We'll be inviting the local businesses in the adjacent business park to come down, to send their staff down to this big open day. And we'll be approaching local news outlets to see if they want to come and cover it that day, so that we can demonstrate everything that's going on at the park. So we can talk about the solar panels, the changing places toilet, the new cafe, the new refreshed toilets that are there. And so we'll get that message out to them there. In terms of communicating what we're currently doing, so we have got signposting up at the country park. So there's a picture of the development plan, and it tells you what's coming, what visitors can expect in the future, and apologising for the mess, because it is a little bit messy whenever you're having to redevelop something, unfortunately. So we have got those communications out. In terms of the wider communications, how do we communicate with our residents to say, hey, look what we're doing, what are you doing? Like I said, we do use our platform, our newsletter that goes out, forgive me, I've forgotten the name of it. Rushcliffe Reports, thank you, Derek. So we do use that to communicate. So if we've got any big projects that we've done or anything that could be of interest, we will send it out to them. What we have to look at doing going forward is upping that communication, where we're saying to our residents, hey, do you know you can reduce your energy? Do you know you can reduce your carbon footprint by X, Y, Z? That's what we're talking about when we're going, I think it's going a bit into your next point. We're talking about the cycling and walking plan that's coming up this year that we're going to develop. Huge amount of communication. Hey, did you know you can get from A to B quite safely on bikes? Not over the road, you can actually cut through, for example, the country park or other places. So it's about getting that really interactive, detailed map, so that our residents know, oh, I didn't know I could go through there. Oh, is that a path I'm allowed down? I thought that was private land, but apparently there's a walking path over it. And it's having that communication. We need to get that out there in terms of having those maps available at council buildings, and also being able to sort of communicate that again through the digital world on our platform, etc. And again, going back to how we've launched the Green Rewards, yes, it is a rewards platform. It is engaging our residents to come in to earn points to get their prizes. But also it's a communication platform, so you can go on there and you can get information about, how do I use a composter? There's things like that, encourage people to set stuff like that, and we can use that to say, oh, actually, here's a link to our cycling maps, to our walking maps. Here's a link to where all the EV charging points are. So we can also use that as a communication platform. But it's something we need to improve on. And to be honest, I think it's something that everybody, not just councils, but also businesses and in general, we all need to prove on, because I think a lot of people tend to work in silos. They do a lot of great stuff and they perhaps don't share it as much and interact as much. And that's something we probably need to focus on, is that sort of communication tactic. So we put out as much as we can currently, but it's about having that sort of 360 feedback where we can have them asking questions as well. And how do we adapt that in the future? Because things are changing, and I keep going back to, it's making sure that we are doing those things together. In terms of the question about electric vans and changing over some of our smaller vehicles. Like I said, we have got this fleet audit coming up this year, so we're going to be auditing all our fleet and going from there. I don't know if Darryl wants to add any further information on that, but he'll probably be the best one to answer.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. It's a very good point you make. As you mentioned, electric refuse vehicles may not be the way forward for Rushcliffe. We do have some smaller vans. We have the pest control and the dog warden vans. We have, as you pointed out, the vans that do the bin deliveries. And members of Derek's team, the facilities attendants, also travel around different community venues. In fact, they recently trialled an electric vehicle as well. We have a capital replacement program for all our vehicles. They're all on it. I don't think we're going to just change them all immediately because some are relatively new vehicles. So we want to make sure that we're getting money for our investment. But when it comes for renewal of those, then yes, they are high up the priority list to start getting some quick wins in.
That facilities vehicles, the West Bridgeford community venues facilities vehicle is a really good example because it's ideal for electric vehicle because it's small and it's relatively short journeys, and there's EV charging points here and at Gamsden and in the future Gresham. So but it has to fit in with this the overall vehicle replacement scheme that Darryl leads upon and making sure that we get that aligned.
Yeah, just on that, I mean, it is one of the things that's quite interesting looking at that the replacement of diesel vehicles, because there are so fewer moving parts for a start on the electric vehicles, and the fleet replacement cycles on those seem to be longer, so you'll be holding on to those potentially for longer. So you're probably getting better value out of those anyway. So definitely something to look into.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation. It's pleased to see kind of the work that has been done up to now and what's kind of, as you touched on, with the future. I've just got kind of 5 questions or points just to ask, and one of them's actually just been touched on with about the pool cars that you mentioned about the for the facilities team have a car. I was wondering if there's kind of looking at like licensing where they've got to go out to premises and stuff like that, and planning it at officers that of course they're going to be going quite all over the borough visiting sites, and of course there's going to be kind of an impact on the environment with them travelling about. I was wondering if there's kind of a scope of electric pool cars for officers to use, so they're not kind of having to use their own. Another one was with the electric vehicle showcase, is that meant to be on the same weekend as the Jubilee weekend? Was that accidental, or I'm not quite sure if that was
in reference to your first point, we, in terms of pool cars, it's not something that we've done, but we propose to be doing travel audits for people because as an authority in terms of the staff travel survey, it's not something we have in terms of pool cars at the moment, but it is something that will be in the plan that we would absolutely look at, and the availability of having a small sort of electric vehicle is something that we will look at as a part of our future businesses. The electric vehicle event is on the 4th and 5th of May, and the Jubilee's 4th and 5th of June. Yeah, so it's literally next week. It's next Wednesday, Thursday, I think.
Yeah. And just on this, the report that we've been provided on, I think it was 5.2, was about residential campaigns on the kind of recycling, and of course you touched on the green rewards, which I think is a great way of getting out the messages that the borough are doing. Yeah. And even myself, I've downloaded it to see what it was like when it was launched and use it, and do often get kind of updates of what you're doing and that. So it's great. But I was wondering if there's any other kind of campaigns that people might not want to have the app, if there's anything else that's being done. And also kind of what's being looked at in recycling with residents and informing them of like the recycling centres, what they can do there and anything like that.
I'm going to pass over to our service manager for waste in a second. But there's a number of campaigns that the depot do in terms of contamination of bins and making sure that they've done as a part of an embedded process over many years in terms of for our recycling rates to try and get people to use the blue and the green and the grey bins appropriately. So I think it'll be more of that. It'll be more about thinking about the packaging and the waste. And we have, as an aside, we have through our community award system, we've recognised a lot of businesses that have sprung up across the borough who are using, you bring your tub and you fill it up as your container. So we've been trying to promote those businesses and encourage those businesses to flourish within the borough, so people make that behaviour change in terms of minimising the packaging that they use as a part of their work. But Darryl, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add from a waste perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's probably two things I would cover. Can reassure you that there is an ongoing message that we're trying to get out to residents. It's actually done through the Joint Waste Officer Group and also the Joint Waste Member Group that Councillor Inglis attends. You would have probably remembered we've had bin smart campaigns across Nottinghamshire, particularly in relation to what can go in the dry recycling bin, so the Rushcliffe Blue bin. Derek's correct, we carry out waste audits, we get monthly contamination reports, so we know exactly where the problems are and where we may need to put out some more leaflets. We have a 4-page recycling leaflet in all the show homes. So when people are buying properties, in the packs there that they can be given out to them. So because a number of people may be moving into Rushcliffe for the first time and don't know what's been recycled. So we're really keen to do that. The bigger picture is obviously something that we wouldn't have had time to discuss tonight, but would have been the government's waste strategy in relation to the Environment Bill that we're still waiting to hear. That is going to be a fundamental change to waste collection, probably one of the biggest ones I've known since we've rolled out wheeled bins. That's going to really focus on a consistency across the country about what can be recycled, how we collect, for instance, glass moving forward, weekly food waste collections. It's also going to be looking at things like deposit return schemes, or a national deposit return scheme. So there's an awful lot happening in waste that we're waiting to hear from, and I have to say we've been waiting for a while now, but there's been a number of other things clearly the government are prioritising at the moment. But certainly locally, we're continuing our message to keep people recycling. And again, we're just end of the year, we're just under 50% recycling again, which will once again be the top recycler in Nottinghamshire.
Just going on with what you've just said, is there kind of anything that is out there for the residents, for those kind of businesses that that they can go and find, like a directory or something like that, or anything of how that's communicated out? And just going on with like the recycling and the sorry, that the point's just gone out straight in my head. I was trying to think of what was next. I just wanted to ask as well, just looking kind of on the future, kind of you touched on, and on the council, but there's about what properties are selected for the LAD and the HUG funding. Is it kind of how are you going to look at the next area? Because you mentioned it's like every 2 years and then you'll go to somewhere else. Is it the same but for an area, and what properties are then going to be next? Because then what kind of campaigns are going to be done in that area? Because of course, like you've experienced in East Leek with the news article, you got inundated with people. How are you going to look at doing that to select the properties in the next area? And then with the net gain, of course, it says about 30 years for the developments. And of course, if we're doing it now, it's more or less going to be at 2050. Is there anything that's been, and it might not be because of the environmental bill, kind of what's the inclination for after those 30 years? Okay.
So in terms of the LAD funding, our criteria will be vulnerability, and in terms of deprivation, and need, and also the housing stock type. So we can either look at it in terms of measures, in terms of what we would do, or in geographical clusters. So areas, but it will always be on a worst first approach. So the worst performing properties, and then looking at the vulnerability within that area, whether it be fuel poverty measures. So that will be the driving criteria, which will bring us to either geographical based locations where we're looking at a ward level or an estate level, and it comes back to the housing stock that is within that area. Is there anything you wanted to add in relation to that?
I think that covers it.
I can't remember your last.
So it was just going about the net gain after 30 years. What kind of, if there is anything with what's going to happen after 30 years?
So in regards to that 30 years in reference to net gain, it's ensuring the additional biodiversity lasts for 30 years. So if a developer builds something next year, they've got 30 years from that moment. If a developer builds something in 2045, it's 30 years from 2045. So it is a rolling thing. And this is something we now have to embed as a council. It can't just be well, we've got this project for this many years. It is a forever thing. It is something we will always have to go back and revisit. So it will require a type of auditing. Similar in the way that we have environmental health officers who will go out and inspect our properties to make sure they're adhering to hygiene standards. We now have a biodiversity standard to go out and inspect. So it's actually a really big fundamental change to not just us, but to all councils. And that is something, that's why this year has to be a focus of how are we going to manage that? It has just come out, has just been announced. So it's how we're going to manage that. What resources do we need? How does that fit in? How do we actually manage those visits, etc.? So it does go on beyond 2050, unless it's removed as a requirement, it will go on indefinitely.
In relation to a couple of waste questions that you asked, I think you're asking, is there something that the residents can see, some sort of app maybe, or something that they know what they can recycle where? I don't know, to be totally honest, the answer to that. I would guess no, because part of the reason the government are introducing the consistency across the country collections is you move from one area to another and no one quite knows what to do. Of course, Nottinghamshire, we've really pushed the 3 bin guide, which goes out to anyone new moving into the house. And that is because generally across Nottinghamshire, there is a consistency about what goes in the Rushcliffe blue bin, goes in the Mansfield green bin as well. So it is the same. So there is no sort of app or anything like that. And it's done more from a leafleting and some of the stuff we will put on social media. What we do is we link in with a company called Recycle Now. So if you go onto our website and we're looking for a local recycling site, you actually would type in what item you want to recycle and your postcode, and it would point you to the nearest recycling site for that, be it Rushcliffe owned or not.
Yeah, that was kind of like Derek said about the businesses, and that was kind of what I was asking. And I just remember me point that I then forgot earlier. You mentioned about the sheets of what they can recycle in a bin, and that goes to new developments and new property. Is there anything that's kind of going to estate agents for anybody that's buying an existing built property and that's coming to the area? Because of course, with what COVID has shown, there's a lot of people that are moving from different areas and built areas like London in particular, wanting to get out into the countryside and to move into different areas. And Rushcliffe's got very good links to a lot of different areas because of being in the Midlands and the train line at Grantham and Newark and that, and just being at the edge of Nottingham. And now with potentially HS2 coming to Parkway, there might be a lot of people looking to come to this area in the future, and it's getting that information of what can they do currently until, if any legislation comes, and it then goes universal across the board. If there's
may be worth with the voting register maybe when people first joined. I actually had a friend of mine who moved from the city to Copgrave actually, and got told off. He bought his glass in the blue bin, put it out there, and not very happy. But he sort of came and told him off, and he just didn't understand why. Yeah, so
we also link into the Tell Us Once scheme. So generally, if a resident is moving into the borough, they will normally phone up or fill in the Tell Us Once scheme, which is letting us know that there's a change in name for council tax, etc. That would alert us to it. We don't do any work with estate agents, but I think it's an excellent idea, and I've already written it down, and we'll take it away.
Councillor Mansell.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question. I'm conscious of time as well, and it's been a long evening. It's been great. A lot of good conversations. Section 5.2, page 11 of the report, talks about technology, and we've got to weigh up the risk, which I fully understand. There's a lot of new technology coming. We're spending a lot of money on electric charging, and the point was made by Council Manager, hydrogen cars could be coming very soon. There's a lot of other technology, and I appreciate we're trialing the vegetable oil in some of the waste vehicles. Are there opportunities to be involved in further pilots? Are there opportunities to use some of this technology in an experimental way? And could we have, I'm not looking like a showcase or something, but where residents then could share ideas, or an opportunity for local universities and the partnerships we've got in the forums to kind of share more and be more involved?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, you're spot on. And in terms of all the different technologies, when it comes to almost anything, but particularly environmental carbon management, there is always going to be a huge variety of technologies available, and there will never be a one size fits all. So yes, we need to improve our EV charging network, but that isn't the be all and end all. We then also need to work on getting people to cycle and walk and all those other options, and possibly look at hydrogen and all the different things coming through as the technology becomes more viable and accessible. In terms of so any projects, any trials, there's always going to be room to do more trials, and there's going to be a lot of trials, and a lot of trial and error before we find the combination of technologies that works. And it will be a combination for all things, for energy production, for transport, for waste collection. There will always be a combination of technologies that get us to where we need to be. But in terms of involving the communities, going back to what I was saying about the Big Business Carbon Club, one of the universities is on there as well, and they're actually a really sort of wonderful resource in terms of the work they're doing. I think we do need to do more though. I think something we need to take away is actually, like you say, how do we engage more with the residents, not just to tell them how they can save energy, but how do we get that expertise of people in the community, like stonemasons and all those different, you've got engineers out there, you've got all these people out there who have those expertise, and it's how do we harness those resources? How do we get in contact with those people? How do we get their opinions on board? And I think that is something we do need to look into and develop further.
Just one point I'd add in terms of at an officer level, it's really led from the top. Our chief executive sits on the environmental strategy group. She chairs that group. So it's looking at innovation, best practice, of what's coming through. And our deputy chief executive and the service manager that leads this portfolio in terms of is pushing Darryl and myself and Laura in terms of to be the early adopters of technologies. So the vegetable oil in terms of the bio is a really good example, because it's just let's do as many pilot trials as possible to see what's working, see what is, and you know, in terms of sprint cycle, if we're going to fail fast and fail quickly, and then see what's working. So it's very much it's very much, this is a journey that we'll be on, and it'll be about trial and error, and as Laura says, work on that. But our director is very keen to make sure that we are pushing those boundaries to seek all those opportunities that we can.
And just finally add, I think that's the right approach to take as well, but we should be communicating more of that as well. Even if it fails, let's communicate that, why it didn't work. It totally makes sense about the trucks, vegetable, rural, absolutely makes sense. We should be communicating that out.
And though I had a few points, don't worry, just one I just want to add in finally, which is around the trees and wildflower. You talk about purchasing land potentially for more trees and wildflower. So that's the point I make. So I still think we have a lot of land we underutilise, even with the increase in the areas. So I've been talking to Paul Phillips for a year or so more about areas in my ward, and I mean, even great examples like Skylarks Nature Reserve. And if you would say to them, you know, can we have some areas to plant that, they're going to be delighted. Same with the new nature reserve we're creating on Wilford Fields behind the arena, as well as the other ones throughout the borough. So I think that's one I'd say first. Russia Country Park, a good example there. I think there's a lot of areas we can utilise before we were to do all of that to potentially buy more land.
Yeah. So Paul Phillips has done a fantastic job calculating how much carbon we suppressed from our tree planting, from our established woodlands, and from our grass management. It's that delicate balance between those open spaces that we currently own and operate. We could have dense woodlands in those areas, but the country park does have to have open spaces for its uses, and as do our parks and open spaces in the areas that we own, because they have an amenity purpose. So it's about trying to always weigh up that balance against reward. In terms of offsetting, we will have to develop an offsetting strategy, because when we get to 2030, we will produce carbon, because we cannot operate as a net neutral, but that is the end point in terms of when we've done everything that we can do, because we could be carbon neutral if we went and offset from now. If we decided to buy land and plant trees, we could say that we were carbon neutral. But what we need to do is we need to go on this journey to try and offset, so that that offsetting will be a solution, but we need to look at it in the round as a part of our asset investment strategy, and be clear about the reason, if we are to purchase land, that it's for planting and it is in perpetuity for that offsetting. But we would like to do that as the point of last resort, because it is the easy out for some multinational companies. They'll be offsetting because they'll be buying that resource to be able to offset.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I think I thank everyone. I mean, that's been a very long night, because we don't have the waste strategy. We have to bring sleeping bags in. But it was really, really great. I think everyone engaged with that, and the amount of detail through there. It's such an important topic for us. The amount of investment we're putting into the fund, but also a high-profile target. We know how high priority this is for many of our residents. So thank everyone engaged. So we had two recommendations. Number one, or A, was to consider endorse the progress to date of the adopted carbon management plan, and B, to make comments and contribute towards emerging carbon management actions for 22-23. My view, we covered all that in great detail. So this is anything else for anyone to add, like to the vote? If anyone's in favour of those two recommendations, please show one in favour.
There's the addition of colleagues' comments about the building structure.
No, absolutely, yeah. So we've already got that on record to take that bit away. So I think absolutely, I know that we'll take that away and come back to Councillor Dickman. We can always cover again in the future when we can bring this back next time. So thank you very much for everyone. Thank you for again the presentation and the amount of detail went into the work you've been doing so far, and it's really much appreciated. Thank you. So very quickly, don't worry, we've got the work programme up next. So there's a slight typo in the work programme where it says there's nothing for October, where there is. We've got the consideration of the Youth Council, which we talked about last time, went through the corporate overview group, so that's on there. In terms of the other item for October, it's proposed at corporate overview group next week that we put onto our agenda, so to speak, if it's all approved, the full name, the external communication strategy. So again, like we touched on today, about communication resonance, so that's a really good tie-in with what will come back in October. Also, from our previous meeting, unless I'm missing one, about the resident survey, when we talked about the morning need test, that's why that item's coming back. Also, some items we proposed through the matrix that we're going to from Councillor Walker. So we're going to put all that together in that one item that will come here in October. If everyone's okay with that, we will endorse that at the meeting next week. Looking at the work programme for corporate overview, there's nothing else on the agenda coming through. In terms of at the next meeting in June, we've got the sports development ones, which Rex put through the matrix, if I remember correctly. So that's a good item. And also one about the canal access, which they're put through the matrix, setting an example. So there you are, you see. If you want to know how to put it through the matrix, Derek's now an expert, so he'll gladly take you through tuition. So they're going to be two items that I'll confirm for our next meeting. So any question on any of that? Everyone okay with that as proposal so far, where we're going to? Okay, so everyone's in favour of that work programme. Thank you very much. Yeah, so again, thank you very much for your engagement time. It's been a long evening, but I think that was really enjoyable in terms of what we went through and the actions put in there. Really appreciate everyone's feedback. I know I'll take over the officers, and again, thank you for your time and stay